let me ask you something that most men are too afraid to even think about. When was the last time you felt completely invisible to someone you would have done anything for? When was the last time you gave everything, your time, your attention, your emotional energy, your loyalty, and watched it disappear into silence? When was the last time you bent yourself out of shape, trying to be enough for someone, and she still walked away or still treated you like you were not quite worth her full presence? You do not have to answer that out loud. But if it stings even a little, if something in your chest shifted just reading those words, then this video is for you, and I need you to stay right here. What you are about to hear is not a collection of bitterness dressed up as wisdom. It is not a manifesto of anger with philosophical branding. What you are about to walk through is something far more rare and far more dangerous than either of those things. It is clarity. The kind of clarity that most men spend entire decades avoiding, because on some level they already sense that once they truly see it, they cannot unsee it. And seeing it clearly means they will have to change. We are going to spend the next hour or so sitting with the philosophy of Baruch Spinoza, a man who lived in the 1600s, was excommunicated from his entire community, had no children, very few close friends, and died in modest circumstances, and yet left behind a body of thought that explains human psychology with a precision that modern science is still catching up to. And we are going to apply those ideas in plain language to something Spinoza himself never directly addressed, but which his philosophy illuminates with startling accuracy. The true nature of female psychology, the mechanics of attraction, and the patterns in men who either command genuine respect or silently destroy themselves trying to earn it. Stay with me until the end, because what I am about to share is going to challenge some of the deepest beliefs you have ever carried about love, about your own worth, and about what it actually means to be a man in relationship with a woman. There is a particular kind of suffering that belongs almost exclusively to men who care deeply, and it is one of the loneliest things I know of. It is not the loud suffering of violence or public failure. Nobody sees this kind. It is quiet. It happens at 2 in the morning when you are staring at the ceiling, replaying a conversation, trying to locate the exact moment everything shifted. It happens in the shower, in the car, in the middle of a meeting, when something reminds you of her and the familiar weight settles back on your chest. It happens when you notice that the more effort you put in, the further away she seems to drift. And the cruelest part, the part that makes it particularly hard for men, is that nobody around you gives you permission to say it out loud. You are supposed to be strong. You are supposed to keep moving. You are supposed to handle it. So men carry it. They carry it silently into the next relationship, still unexamined, still unresolved. And they repeat the same patterns, the same surrender of self, the same bending, the same quiet erosion of dignity, because nobody ever sat them down and told them the truth without flinching. I want to be that person for you today, not to wound you, not to make you cynical about women or relationships or love, but to give you the one thing every man deserves when it comes to understanding human nature, and that is honesty, wrapped in wisdom and delivered with genuine respect for the path you have already walked. What I am going to share with you today does not come from hatred. I want to state that plainly before we go one single step further. Women are not the enemy. They are not broken. They are not evil or shallow or incapable of genuine love. They are, like all human beings, driven by nature, by biology, by psychology, and by forces that most of them do not even fully understand in themselves. Understanding those forces does not mean condemning them. It means understanding the terrain you are operating in, so you stop navigating it blindfolded. Because the hard truth is this: most men enter the relational landscape completely blind. They operate on hope instead of understanding, on sentiment instead of clarity. They confuse love with self-erasure, and then they stand in the wreckage wondering why nobody respects the person they became. By the time this video ends, you will have something fundamentally different. A framework. A philosophical lens, rooted in Spinoza's deepest insights, that lets you see yourself, your relational patterns, and the women in your life with a new kind of precision. And that precision, applied with emotional intelligence and genuine masculine strength, has the power to change the entire trajectory of your relational life. So, who was Baruch Spinoza, and why does a 17th-century Dutch philosopher matter to a man navigating the complexity of modern relationships? Spinoza was born in Amsterdam in 1632 into a Jewish family that had fled persecution in Portugal. He was considered brilliant from early childhood. He read widely, thought deeply, and began to develop ideas about God, nature, and human psychology that were so far outside the accepted thinking of his time that his own community eventually turned on him. At the age of 23, he was issued one of the most severe excommunications in the history of the Amsterdam Jewish community. The document banning him used language so harsh that historians still debate exactly what he had done or said. He was cut off from family, from community, from every social structure that had defined his life. He was essentially erased. And yet, he kept writing. He moved into modest lodgings and supported himself by grinding optical lenses, a meticulous, quiet craft that required patience, precision, and the kind of undivided attention that his work demanded. He lived frugally. He declined lucrative academic positions because he did not want institutional pressures to corrupt his thinking. He refined his philosophy over decades, in private, asking no one's permission and seeking no one's approval. His masterwork, a book simply titled The Ethics, was written in the geometric style of a mathematical proof, with definitions, axioms, and propositions, almost as if he were trying to describe human nature with the same precision one would describe the movements of planets. It was so radical, so deeply challenging to religious and political authority, that he chose not to publish it during his lifetime. He died at 44 years old, likely from lung disease related to years of inhaling glass dust while grinding lenses. The Ethics was published posthumously, and its influence has been growing ever since. Now, Spinoza did not write a book about dating. He did not write about attraction psychology or masculine development in the modern sense. But what he did write about was human psychology at the most fundamental level, the mechanics of emotion, desire, power, freedom, and the forces that either liberate a person or keep them in a kind of invisible prison. And it turns out those mechanics explain modern human behavior with an accuracy that should make you sit up. Here is the entire core of Spinoza's system, distilled into 3 ideas you can carry with you everywhere. The first idea is the conatus. Spinoza proposed that everything in existence, every living thing, every organism, every person, has at its very core a drive to persist in its own being, to continue existing, to grow, to preserve and expand itself. He called this the conatus, and he believed it was not just a physical drive, but a psychological and emotional one. Every person you have ever met, no matter how generous or selfless they appear on the surface, is at the deepest level operating according to this program. They are trying to persist, to flourish, to increase their sense of vitality and power. That is not selfishness in the moral sense. That is simply the nature of living things. Understanding this one idea alone will change how you read people. The second idea is that emotions are not random, irrational, or obstacles to be overcome. Emotions are information. Every emotion you feel is your organism communicating something real about your relationship to your environment. Spinoza defined joy as the emotion that arises when something increases your power, your vitality, your sense of aliveness, your capacity to act and flourish. And sadness is the emotion that arises when something diminishes that power. These are not just pleasant or unpleasant feelings, they are signals. They are your deepest self, telling you whether what is in front of you is contributing to your flourishing or diminishing it. Most people feel these signals but never actually listen to them. They override them with logic, with obligation, with fear of what listening might require. The third idea is what Spinoza called human bondage. And this is the one that will land heaviest if you are honest with yourself. Spinoza argued that most human beings are not actually free. They believe they are free, but they are driven almost entirely by passions they have never examined. Fear, desire, the need for approval, jealousy, pride, rage, rage. These passions drive their choices, their reactions, their entire relational lives, without those people ever stepping back far enough to see the pattern. They are, in Spinoza's word, in bondage, not to a person or a system, but to their own unexamined emotional drives. And the path out of that bondage, Spinoza's entire project, is not suppression. It is not becoming cold or detached in the shallow sense. The path is understanding, to understand your passions so completely, to see where they come from, what they are responding to, what they are actually seeking, that you are no longer blindly controlled by them, that you can feel them and still choose. That is what Spinoza meant by freedom. And that kind of freedom is what this video is ultimately about. Now take those three ideas, the conatus, emotions as information, and human bondage through unexamined passion, and bring them directly into the conversation about men, women, attraction, and the patterns that either build a man up or quietly hollow him out. What you begin to see is not a villain. What you begin to see is a system. And once you see the system clearly, you can move through it consciously rather than being moved by it blindly. The 5-ton per psychological truckle truchas pronipple 1. Hypergamy is not personal. It is biological programming. Let me say something plainly that will make one kind of man furious and another kind of man deeply, genuinely relieved. Women are biologically inclined to seek the highest value partner available to them, not the richest, not the tallest. The highest value, as defined by a complex, multidimensional, largely unconscious internal assessment that varies by woman, by life stage and by circumstance, but which is always, in some form, operating. This phenomenon has a name in the academic literature, hypergamy, and understanding it, truly understanding it, rather than reacting to it, is one of the most practically useful things a man can do for his sanity and his relational effectiveness. Here is what hypergamy means in practice. A man, broadly speaking, is highly responsive to visual attractiveness. His assessment of a potential partner is weighted heavily toward the physical and is often processed rapidly. A woman's assessment is far more multi-layered. She is simultaneously and largely below the level of conscious awareness, evaluating status signals, social proof, emotional confidence, physical capability, competence in the world, leadership potential, and dozens of subtler behavioral cues. She is not running through a checklist. The process is instinctive, and underneath all of it, there is an ancient biological calibration happening that is essentially asking, is this man among the best available to me? Now here is where it becomes critical for the man who is watching this. Hypergamy is not static. It is not a fixed calculation she runs once at the beginning of a relationship and then sets aside. It is ongoing, continuous, and it is responsive to behavior, specifically to behaviors that either demonstrate genuine value and strength or that erode the perception of those things over time. Think about a man named Marcus. Marcus met a woman named Priya and immediately felt that she was exceptional. And she was. She was intelligent, warm, genuinely lovely. And Marcus, driven by exactly the kind of passionate desire that Spinoza warned against, poured everything in immediately. He texted first every day. He rearranged his schedule around hers. He told her she was extraordinary within the first 2 weeks. He made himself completely and unconditionally available, emotionally and physically, from the very beginning. He gave everything, freely and immediately, because that is what love feels like from the inside. And Priya, who genuinely liked Marcus when they first met, found herself over the course of 2 months feeling something she could not quite name. A quiet withdrawal, a subtle loss of interest, a sense that something had gone flat. She was not cruel. She was not playing games. She was responding to what Marcus's behavior was communicating at a level below language. His complete, unconditional availability had told her system something devastating. This man is not in demand. This man has nowhere else to be. And in the ancient calculus of attraction, a man with nowhere else to be is not, by definition, a high-value man. This is the precise dynamic that Spinoza's concept of human bondage illuminates so painfully. Marcus was not free. He was being driven entirely by his desire, so completely that he could not see how his own behavior was defeating what he most wanted. He was in bondage to his longing, and that bondage was expressed in every text he sent, every schedule he cleared, every time he communicated that she was the center of his entire world. The practical shift is this: understand that attraction is not a function of how intensely you want someone. It is a function of your perceived value relative to that person, and perceived value is demonstrated through behavior, not declared through words. Your investment in any person should be calibrated, growing proportionally as genuine connection deepens, not front-loaded and unconditional from the start. This is not manipulation. This is self-respect expressed through behavioral intelligence. Principle 2. Emotional testing is real, and most will fail it. Completely women test men. Not all women consciously. Not all women consciously. But the testing behavior is real, it is consistent across cultures and ages, and it serves a specific psychological function that makes perfect sense once you understand it. Here is what an emotional test actually looks like in real life. You make a plan together, and at the last moment, she changes her mind for no clear reason, or she makes a provocative statement, something slightly critical, slightly cold, slightly unfair, and then watches how you respond. Or after a period of genuine warmth and closeness, she suddenly goes quiet and distant, apparently without cause. Or she challenges a decision you made, your opinion on something important to you, or the direction you said you wanted to move in. Most men misread these moments entirely. They assume something is broken. They assume they did something wrong, so they scramble to fix it. They apologize, sometimes for things that did not warrant apology. They over-explain themselves. They become visibly anxious and, crucially, they let that anxiety be seen. And the moment the anxiety is visible, the test is effectively failed. This is not because she was setting a trap. This is not a malicious process. What is happening, at the deepest level, is that her instincts are performing a fundamental assessment. Does this man's sense of himself come from inside himself, or does it depend on my approval to remain stable? Is he internally anchored, or does he drift based on my mood? A man who is genuinely anchored internally does not crumble when she withdraws. He does not beg when she goes cold. He does not flood her with apologies when she is vague. He notices the shift. He remains present. He maintains his direction, and he does not transform himself into a different person in order to return the situation to comfortable ground. That stillness, that refusal to be destabilized by her emotional weather, is one of the most genuinely attractive qualities a man can embody, and it cannot be faked consistently. It has to be built. Spinoza described the state of being thrown about by every emotional wind as the condition of a man who has not developed adequate understanding of himself and his situation. The man who does not understand his own emotional patterns will be controlled by whatever emotional force enters the room. The man who does understand them, who has sat with himself enough to know what his triggers are, where his anxieties come from, what his default reactions look like, and why, that man has something that most men never develop: genuine steadiness. The practical shift: the next time you feel the pull to chase when she withdraws, to apologize without cause, or to shrink under her scrutiny, stop. Take a breath that is long enough to feel it. Ask yourself honestly, is what she is presenting a legitimate grievance that deserves engagement, or is it a test of my stability? If it is the latter, the most powerful response available to you is almost always to remain calm, to remain clear, and to remain yourself. Let your stillness do the communicating. Principle 3. Validation seeking is the most efficient way to destroy attraction. There is a man I want to tell you about. His name, for our purposes, is David. David was 41 years old when I first encountered his story. He was, in his professional life, someone genuinely worth admiring. He ran a team of 12 people, made consequential decisions daily, and was widely regarded by colleagues as someone whose judgment could be trusted. He was not performing competence. He actually had it, But put David in a romantic relationship and something almost unrecognizable emerged. The confidence evaporated. In its place came something quiet and corrosive, a constant low-level hunger for reassurance. He checked text messages the way some people check stock prices. He asked variations of the question, "Are we okay?" more often than he probably realized. He needed her to confirm regularly, in one form or another, that he was still wanted, that he was still enough. And every time he asked, even when she answered warmly, even when she provided the reassurance he was seeking, the relief lasted maybe an hour before the hunger returned. And here is the brutal truth about what David was actually communicating every time he sought that validation. He was communicating that his fundamental sense of worth, his bedrock belief that he mattered, that he was someone worth choosing, was not something he owned internally. It was something he rented on a short-term basis from her approval. Without her confirmation, the foundation wobbled, and she could feel that wobbling even if she could not name it. Even if she genuinely cared about him and wanted to provide what he needed, she could feel the weight of being responsible for his emotional flaw. And carrying another adult's emotional flaw is exhausting, it is suffocating. And it is one of the most reliable ways to cause a woman to quietly begin withdrawing from a man she may have genuinely loved. Spinoza would place David squarely in the center of his concept of human bondage. Not the dramatic visible bondage of addiction or obsession, but the quiet invisible bondage of being a slave to the opinion of another person. And the particular cruelty of this bondage is its self-perpetuating nature. The more approval David sought, the more his seeking communicated insecurity, and the more that insecurity made him feel, correctly, that he needed to seek even more approval. It is a closed loop. And the only exit from that loop is not better reassurance. The only exit is the long, genuine work of building an internal sense of worth that does not require external maintenance. The practical shift, begin the practice, and it is a practice, not a switch you flip, of grounding your sense of value in things that are genuinely yours, your decisions, your discipline, your growth, your integrity under pressure. The choices you make when nobody is watching. Build a relationship with yourself that is honest and respectful enough that you are not chronically running to someone else for confirmation that you exist and matter. That internal relationship, developed sincerely over time, changes everything about how you show up in every other relationship. Principle 4. She cannot love a man she does not respect. Read that heading one more time, slowly. Because it is the hinge on which everything else in this video turns. She cannot love a man she does not respect. Most men carry an implicit belief that love and respect are two separate currencies in a relationship, that a woman can love them deeply while not particularly respecting them, and that love is somehow the more important of the two. This belief is one of the costliest mistakes a man can make in his relational life. Because love and respect, in the context of a woman's sustained feeling for a man she is in a committed relationship with, are not separate. They are entangled at the root. A woman can feel warmth toward a man she does not respect. She can feel affection, tenderness, genuine care. But the kind of love that builds over time, the kind that makes her consistently choose him, desire him, respect his leadership and trust his strength, that love has respect as its absolute prerequisite. Remove the respect and love becomes something else. Something thinner. Something that looks like love from a distance but feels close up, like pity or obligation. And what destroys respect? Not conflict, not imperfection, not even significant failure. What destroys respect is a consistent, observable pattern of behaviors that communicate one thing above all others: this man does not fully value himself. The pattern looks like this. He apologizes constantly, often for things that did not merit apology, because apologizing feels safer than potentially triggering her displeasure. He abandons his positions the moment she expresses discomfort with them, not because he changed his mind, but because he cannot hold the tension of her disapproval. He accommodates what he would never accommodate from anyone else in his life, simply because the thought of conflict with her is too frightening. He shrinks the expression of his actual preferences, opinions, and needs because making space for them might take up room she wants for hers. Each of these behaviors, in isolation, looks like consideration, like flexibility, like the kind of giving that relationships require. But as a pattern, consistent, week after week, month after month, they tell a story. And the story they tell is that this man does not believe, at the deepest level, that he deserves to take up space. And a man who does not believe he deserves to take up space is a man who is very difficult to genuinely respect. Not because she is cruel, but because self-respect is one of the most fundamental signals of a man's inner strength. And inner strength is not an optional feature in the masculine-feminine dynamic. It is the foundation. The practical shift: take an honest inventory of the ways you currently accommodate behavior, suppress needs, or abandon positions specifically to avoid conflict or manage her emotional state. Not every instance is problematic. Genuine accommodation is part of any mature relationship, but look for the pattern. Look for the places where you are operating from fear rather than from genuine generosity. Because generosity given from fear is not generosity, it is a transaction. And transactions in relationships are corrosive. Principle 5. The economics of attention, scarcity, value, and what abundance actually costs. Here is a principle that operates across every domain of human life, from financial markets to real estate to creative work to, yes, the dynamics of attraction. Things that are freely and abundantly available are almost universally perceived as less valuable than things that are rare. This is not cynicism. This is not a manipulation framework. This is a basic and well-documented feature of human psychology. We are wired at a very deep level to assign value partly based on availability. What is everywhere is taken for granted. What is rare becomes precious. Now bring that principle into the relational arena. When a man makes himself completely and unconditionally available, when his schedule reorganizes itself around hers, when he responds to every message within minutes regardless of what else he is doing, when she knows with absolute certainty that she is the dominant priority in his life, above his work and his friendships and his own development, he has made himself abundant, freely, generously, completely abundant. And abundance in this context collapses perceived value in the same way it would in any other market. James understood this, not because he had read about it or been taught it, but because he had a life that was genuinely full. He was in his mid-30s, running a small business that required real engagement, maintaining close friendships with men he had known for years, and working on a creative project that had been occupying a significant portion of his attention for 18 months. When he met Sophia, he liked her immediately and genuinely. But he did not rearrange his life around her because his life was not empty enough to rearrange. He kept his commitments. He showed up fully when they were together. But he did not manufacture artificial scarcity. He simply lived his actual life, which had actual demands on it. And Sophia, who had in past relationships encountered men who smothered her with availability within the first few weeks, found herself thinking about James at unexpected moments, curious about what he was doing, interested in a way that felt different from the interest she usually felt, lighter and somehow more compelling. That is the effect of genuine scarcity, not manufactured, not performed, but real. The natural byproduct of the man who has built a life that is genuinely worth living, independent of any relationship. Through Spinoza's lens, James was expressing a healthy conatus. He was moving toward his own flourishing, investing in his own capacity, building things that mattered to him. And that movement, that orientation toward growth and purpose, radiated outward in a way that others felt and responded to without quite knowing why. The practical shift, the question to ask yourself is not, how available should I seem? The question is, do I have a life that would be meaningful even without this relationship? If the honest answer is no, if the relationship is the primary source of meaning, structure, and emotional investment in your life, then the work is not relational strategy. The work is building something real. That building, done with genuine commitment, is what creates the life from which authentic magnetism naturally flows. Chronicle 6, Frame Control. Who authors the reality of your relationship? In every relationship, there is an invisible but enormously consequential dynamic at work. It is the question of whose reality defines the relationship, whose sense of how things are serves as the reference point, whose mood sets the emotional temperature of the room, whose expectations function as the standard against which everything is measured. This invisible dynamic is called frame, and it shapes more of what happens in a relationship than most people ever consciously examine. In most relationships where the man is struggling, where he feels confused, undervalued, or like he is perpetually playing catch-up, the underlying issue is almost always that he has, over time and without realizing it, surrendered his frame entirely and adopted hers. He has begun interpreting his own behavior through her standard. He judges whether the relationship is healthy based on her mood. He feels secure when she is warm and genuinely anxious when she is distant. Her emotional state has become the barometer by which he reads the entire situation, and in that surrender he has communicated, without a word, that her reality is more authoritative than his, that she holds the higher ground. But here is the thing about frame: it is not established by declaration. You cannot announce your frame and expect it to hold. Frame is demonstrated through behavior, through consistency, through the simple, repeated act of having a perspective and holding it. It is demonstrated in the moments when she is unhappy with your decision and you hear her out genuinely, consider what she is saying, and then either adjust because you actually agree or maintain your position because you actually do not. Not coldly, not dismissively, but clearly. Think about two people in a room, one of whom is genuinely calm and one of whom is in emotional turmoil. In almost every case, the emotional state of the calmer person begins to regulate the room, not through argument, not through dominance, but through the quiet signal that a stable, grounded nervous system sends to everything around it. This situation is manageable. I am not afraid. The ground is solid. That signal is one of the most profoundly steadying things one person can offer another, and a man who has developed the inner stability to provide that signal consistently is not just more attractive. He is genuinely more valuable as a partner because he brings real regulation to the relational space. The practical shift: start in small things. When someone asks where you want to eat, answer. When you have an opinion about a decision that affects both of you, express it clearly, without aggression, and without subsequently abandoning it the moment any pushback arrives. Practice the experience of having position and holding it through mild discomfort. That practice, accumulated over weeks and months, builds the kind of internal confidence that eventually becomes effortless. It is the quiet accumulation of self-trust, and self-trust is the bedrock of frame. Chronicle 7, The Paradox of Emotional Strength. And here is where we pause, because Principle 7 may fundamentally change the way you understand what it means to be emotionally strong. Most men have inherited a definition of emotional strength that is, at its core, about emotional suppression. Do not feel too much. Do not show vulnerability. Keep the wall up. Process privately, if at all. This model of strength is not strength. It is a defense mechanism. And the men who have adopted it most completely are not, in most cases, the most grounded or the most powerful. They are often the most reactive, the most controlled by unexpressed emotion, the most likely to either explode under pressure or go completely cold in moments that call for genuine presence. Real emotional strength looks radically different. Real emotional strength is the capacity to feel everything, the full range of what life and love and loss produce in a person, without being controlled by any of it. It is the ability to be genuinely moved by the death of a friendship, genuinely hurt by betrayal, genuinely tender in the presence of something beautiful, and to allow all of that fullness without letting it commandeer your behavior or cloud your judgment. It is depth with stability. Sensitivity with groundedness, the ability to feel deeply and act wisely simultaneously. Spinoza described this as the difference between passive and active emotions. A passive emotion happens to you. It enters from outside. takes hold and drives your behavior in ways you may not consciously choose. An active emotion arises from your own understanding and power. You feel it fully, but it originates from your own clarity rather than from external provocation. You are not numb, but you are in charge. The man who has developed this quality, who can sit in the discomfort of a difficult conversation without shutting down or exploding, who can feel how much something costs him without letting the cost determine his behavior, who can love deeply without disappearing into the love, that man is extraordinarily rare and extraordinarily compelling, because most people have never experienced that combination of emotional depth and genuine stability in a single person. When they do, they feel it immediately. It is the difference between a man who is present and a man who is performing, and presence, real presence, is one of the most powerful things in human relationship. Palate, purpose, is the foundation. Without it, everything else is unstable. A man without genuine purpose is relationally vulnerable in a way that has nothing to do with weakness of character. It has to do with the basic economy of psychological energy. Every person has a certain amount of emotional and psychological resource to spend. That resource flows toward whatever is most alive in a person's life, toward what demands engagement, what generates meaning, what creates the feeling of being genuinely occupied by something that matters. When a man has no compelling purpose, no project, no mission, no discipline that demands his consistent best, his resource flows toward what is most available. And in a relationship, the most available thing is usually the relationship itself. The woman, her moods, her responses, her level of interest, the trajectory of how she seems to feel about him on any given day. And when all of that resource, all of that attention, emotional investment, and need for meaning lands on one person in a relationship, it creates an unbearable pressure. It is too much for any single person to hold. And it changes the entire quality of the connection, transforming it from something that adds to life into something that demands to be the replacement for life. A man with genuine purpose, something he is building that requires him, that will not build itself, that pushes against his edges and requires him to grow, brings a fundamentally different quality to his relationships. He is not there because he has nowhere else to be. He is there because he is choosing it in the middle of a life that has genuine alternatives. And that choosing, done from a place of real fullness rather than emptiness, is one of the most attractive qualities a man can carry into a relationship. Spinoza's conatus, expressed at its highest, is not just persisting. It is actively flourishing, striving toward mastery, toward contribution, toward something that uses a man's best capacities in service of something beyond his own comfort. A man in that state does not need a relationship to give his life meaning. He brings meaning to his relationships. And that reversal from needing to giving changes everything. The practical shift: if you remove the relationship from your life tomorrow, what would remain that genuinely mattered to you? If the answer is thin, the work is not relational. The work is the harder, longer, more honest work of finding and building something that is genuinely worth your time and commitment, outside of any romantic relationship. That work, done seriously, will transform how you show up in every intimate connection that follows. Principle 9. True detachment. Power without indifference. Detachment is almost universally misunderstood. In the masculine development space especially, the word gets used in ways that are really describing emotional unavailability, coldness, or strategic withdrawal designed to generate interest. That is not detachment, that is performance. And it produces, at best, shallow results. Real detachment is something entirely different and far more rare. Real detachment is the capacity to be fully present in a relationship, to care deeply, to give generously, to invest genuinely, while not requiring a specific outcome in order to be okay. It is the internal freedom that comes from knowing that your fundamental well-being does not depend on this particular person choosing you. That if she leaves or pulls back or changes, you will grieve whatever needs to be grieved and then continue building your life. That your life does not hinge on her staying. A man who has this quality gives from a genuinely different place than a man who does not. He gives because he wants to, because giving is an expression of who he is, not because he is managing his anxiety about losing her by demonstrating his value through constant service. And the person on the receiving end of that kind of giving can feel the difference. She can feel whether your generosity is rooted in authentic care or in fear of loss. And the one rooted in authentic care is far more compelling, far more sustainable, and far more likely to generate genuine reciprocity. The practical shift, the path to this kind of detachment, is not emotional withdrawal. It is the genuine development of a life that is rich and meaningful enough that no single person's departure from it would be catastrophic. Not painless. The departure of someone you love is always painful, but not catastrophic. That distinction is everything. Pilimpel 10. Behavior is the only language that matters. You can say anything. Words are remarkably easy to produce and remarkably difficult to hold to over time. And most people, women in particular, given their attunement to relational patterns and emotional signals, know this. They know it not because they are cynical, but because they have learned through experience to track behavior rather than declarations. Because behavior is where the truth actually lives. You can say you are confident, and if your behavior is anxious and reactive, the behavior will be believed. You can say you have standards, and if you repeatedly accept treatment that violates those standards, the acceptance will be believed. You can say you are a man of your word, and if your follow-through is inconsistent, the inconsistency will be believed. Always the behavior, without exception. This is why the framework matters. Spinoza's entire system is predicated on the idea that who you are internally will always, eventually, be expressed externally. Your behavioral patterns are not separate from your inner state, they are the expression of it. A man who is genuinely secure internally will produce behavior that is, over time, consistent with that security. A man who carries unexamined anxiety will produce behavior that reveals it, no matter how carefully he manages his words in the short term. The practical shift: stop trying to manage what you say and start examining what you consistently do. Look at the pattern of your behavior over the past 3 or 4 months in whatever relational context matters most to you. Not the best moments, not the worst moments, the pattern. What story does that pattern tell? Because that story is your actual communication, and it is the one being received and responded to. Principle 11. The comfort trap. How safety becomes the enemy of desire. There is a dynamic that appears in long-term relationships with such regularity that it might as well be a law of relational physics. It goes like this. In the early phase of a relationship, there is genuine aliveness between two people. Uncertainty, novelty. The electric quality of not quite knowing yet how this will go. She is engaged, attentive, drawn to him. He feels this, and it is extraordinary. And then, gradually, as the relationship settles and solidifies, something begins to change. She becomes less engaged, more distant, sometimes more critical. The warmth is still there in moments, but the pull, the active, seeking quality of her interest, fades. And the man, bewildered and frightened, begins working harder. He tries to be more accommodating, more available, more demonstrably devoted, and the harder he tries, the worse it gets. What happened? The relationship became safe, fully predictable, and the human nervous system, female or male, is not designed to sustain desire in the presence of complete predictability. Desire requires a small degree of uncertainty. It requires the felt sense that the other person is not entirely secured, that their presence is still in some sense being actively chosen, that they remain capable of surprising you. When all of that disappears, when a man becomes so predictable, so accommodating, so entirely knowable, a part of the relational engine that generates desire simply goes quiet. This is not an invitation to be unreliable or erratic. Stability of character is deeply valuable and genuinely attractive. What needs to remain alive is not instability, but growth, the observable felt reality that this man is still becoming someone, still pushing into new territory, still capable of engaging you with something you have not seen from him before. A man who is genuinely growing, who is challenging himself, developing new capacities, deepening his thinking, pursuing things that stretch him, naturally maintains a quality of aliveness that keeps the relationship from going flat. The practical shift: ask yourself with radical honesty whether you have stopped growing in the context of your relationship, whether the version of you that exists inside the relationship is essentially identical to the version that entered it. If the answer is yes, the relationship may not be the problem. The stagnation may be. And stagnation is always, always something a man has the power to address. Starting today. Principle 12. The masculine wound. What you are bringing into the room. Now we go somewhere that requires more honesty than anything else in this video. Because what I want to talk about is the wound, the specific, personal, deeply embedded psychological pattern that most men carry from their early lives into every relationship they enter, often without the slightest awareness that it is there. Every man who has grown up in the complexity of a real human family, and that is all of us, has wounds. Not dramatic wounds necessarily, not necessarily abuse or catastrophic neglect. Sometimes they are subtle. The father who was present physically but emotionally unavailable. The mother whose love felt conditional on performance. The early relationship with a woman that ended in rejection at a formative moment. The experience of being shamed for showing vulnerability or feeling invisible in a room full of people who are supposed to see you. These experiences shape the lens through which we enter every subsequent relationship. And they do not announce themselves. They do not arrive with a label that says, here is your wound and here is how it is going to express itself. They operate underground. They express themselves as inexplicable reactions to specific triggers, as the way a certain kind of withdrawal from her makes you feel a very old, very specific fear. As the reason you cannot tolerate conflict, not because you are fundamentally conflict-averse, but because conflict in your home of origin meant something dangerous. As the reason approval from a woman carries a specific, outsized weight, because approval from a specific woman a long time ago was never reliably available. If you do not understand your wound, you will live it out in your relationships, repeatedly, in ways you cannot explain and cannot seem to stop. You will trigger patterns you did not choose and cannot account for. You will find yourself emotionally flooded in moments that should not logically be that intense. And you will likely conclude that the problem is her, or women in general, or relationships themselves, rather than recognizing the unhealed wound that you carried in with you. This is Spinoza's deepest practical challenge: achieve adequate understanding of yourself, not just of the situation in front of you, but of the history that shaped the eyes through which you see the situation. Because without that understanding, you are not free. You are running ancient software on modern hardware, and it is causing crashes you cannot diagnose. The practical shift: if you have never done the work of examining your psychological history, through therapy, through genuine, sustained self-reflection, through the kind of vulnerable conversation with a trusted man that allows you to be truly seen, consider beginning, not because you are broken, but because self-knowledge is not a luxury. In Spinoza's world, it is the foundation of everything. It is the only path to the kind of freedom that allows you to genuinely choose your life rather than repeat your wounds. Principle 10. Desperation. Why it destroys everything it touches. There is a quality that men carry sometimes, especially after significant loss, after divorce, after years of loneliness, that is so immediately, completely, and universally corrosive to attraction that even men who have never thought about any of this intuitively recognize it in other men. It is desperation, and it is worth understanding with great precision because it is not what most people think it is. Desperation is not simply wanting someone too much. Deep, genuine desire for connection is not the problem. The problem is when that desire is accompanied by a fear so large that it changes the entire quality of your presence. When the fear of not being chosen is so significant that every interaction is shaped by your need to manage the outcome. When you are not actually seeing the person in front of you because you are too busy trying to ensure that they see you in a specific way. Richard was 52 when his marriage ended, 18 years, 3 children, and a grief so profound that it took him nearly 2 years to begin trying to build a social life again. When he did start dating, everything he brought to those early interactions was colored by the enormity of what he had lost. Every woman he met felt in some way like an opportunity to answer the most painful question he was carrying. Am I still someone who can be chosen? And because that question was so desperate and so enormous, it leaked into everything. Into the way he arrived too eager, revealed too much too soon, needed her response to regulate his own emotional state before the meal was even finished. Women sensed it within the first 20 minutes, consistently. And consistently, kindly, sometimes confusedly, they did not call back. The answer to desperation is not to pretend not to care. The answer is to build the life in which the question Richard was carrying, am I still worth choosing, has been answered internally before any date begins. That internal answer does not come from affirmation or reassurance. It comes from the patient, genuine work of rebuilding a life that feels worth living, from the inside, independently of whether any particular person chooses you on any particular evening. Principle 14, attraction, does not respond to logic. Stop arguing for it. This is one that saves men enormous energy once they truly absorb it. Attraction is not a rational decision that responds to evidence and argument. You cannot convince a woman to feel attracted to you by presenting a compelling case for why she should. You cannot negotiate desire by pointing to your qualities, your stability, your character, your consistent love. And the harder you try, the more you attempt to reason or persuade your way into her feeling for you, the further you tend to move from what you are trying to create. Because attraction is not an opinion. It is not a judgment that can be revised by counter-argument. It is a felt experience that arises, or does not, in response to the total presence of a person, in response to how it feels to be in their company, to how they carry themselves in a room, to whether their energy communicates aliveness or anxiety, groundedness or grasping. These impressions are processed below the level of conscious thought, and they are not accessible to rational rebuttal. What creates attraction, then? Presence, genuine ease in one's own skin, the quality of being genuinely interested in her rather than anxious about her response. The combination of warmth and challenge, of being someone who is fully engaged with her, but who also clearly does not need her approval to feel okay. Purpose that is visible in how you talk about your life. Physical discipline that communicates self-respect. The capacity to hold genuine silence without filling it with nervous chatter. These things work because they land at the level of feeling, and feeling is where attraction lives. The practical shift, spend less time trying to explain why you are worth choosing and more time becoming someone whose presence makes the explanation unnecessary. Principle 15, brotherhood. Why men need other men to stay strong. The final principle is one that has nothing directly to do with women and everything to do with your capacity to remain genuinely strong in your relational life. It is this, a man who has allowed his male friendships to atrophy, who has, over time, allowed the relational landscape of his life to collapse into a single intimate relationship, is a man who is one heartbreak away from complete psychological disorientation. The men who struggle most profoundly in romantic relationships are, more often than not, the men who have no genuine community of other men, who have no one in their life who knows them well enough to challenge them, reflect them, hold them accountable, and simply witness their life without agenda. The man who has no male community will inevitably direct all of those needs, for being known, for being challenged, for having his experience reflected back to him, toward the woman he is with. And that redirection places an impossible burden on a romantic relationship that was never designed to carry all of that weight. Spinoza understood that human beings flourish in community, that the conatus is not just individual, but relational, that a person's capacity and power are partly a function of the relational context they inhabit. You are shaped by who you spend time with. The quality of your community shapes the quality of your thinking, your ambition, your self-understanding, and your resilience. Investing in genuine male friendships, not surface-level professional networking or social media connection, but the real thing, the kind where you know each other's actual lives and can speak honestly about difficulty, is not optional. It is part of the infrastructure of a strong masculine life, And a man who has that infrastructure stands in his romantic relationships from a fundamentally more grounded place than a man who does not. I want to pause here and ask you something directly. I want you to resist the impulse to answer quickly, because the quick answer is almost always the defended answer, the one you have rehearsed without realizing it. When was the last time you walked away from something that was costing you your self-respect, even though walking away was genuinely frightening? There is a seductive comfort in familiar pain. You know how it feels. You know how to manage it. The body has adapted to it. And so men stay in relationships that do not honor them, in dynamics that diminish them, in roles they have long outgrown, because the discomfort of the familiar is, in a strange way, less threatening than the discomfort of the unknown. Even when the unknown is dignity. Even when the unknown is freedom. Now ask yourself this: if the man you most want to become, not the idealized fantasy, but the genuinely strong, clear, grounded man you catch glimpses of in your best moments, if that man were watching the behavioral patterns of your last 2 years in relationships, what would he see? Would he see someone who was acting from genuine strength, or would he see someone who was managing anxiety beautifully disguised as love? There is no verdict in that question. There is only invitation. The invitation to look honestly, because honest looking is always where genuine change begins. Are you giving in your relationships from abundance, from a place of genuine fullness and chosen generosity, or from fear? Are the standards you hold for how you are treated actually yours, or have they been quietly renegotiated downward over time, one accommodation at a time, until you are living well below what you originally understood yourself to deserve? Are you genuinely growing in ways that are visible, that challenge you, that make you someone different this year than you were last year? Or has the relationship absorbed the energy that was meant to go toward your development? These questions are not accusations. They are the questions that a genuinely wise mentor asks of a man he respects, because he knows that honest self-examination is not weakness. It is the most demanding form of courage. And it is the foundation on which every other kind of strength is built. Let me tell you about 2 men. Both of their stories contain things you will recognize, even though neither man is real in the literal sense. Both are real in every way that matters. The first man is Thomas. Thomas came into his mid-30s with a relational pattern that had already repeated itself 3 times. He was the kind of man who fell fast, gave completely, and within 12 to 18 months consistently found himself in a relationship where he felt invisible, unacknowledged, and quietly furious. Furious mostly at himself, though he aimed it elsewhere. After the 3rd relationship ended, Thomas did something that changed his life. Instead of immediately filling the void, he sat with it. He stayed in the discomfort long enough to actually feel what was underneath it. He started reading. He started talking. Not performing pain, but genuinely talking to a couple of men he trusted. He eventually began working with a therapist who was competent and honest enough to point directly at the pattern rather than comfort him around it. And what emerged, slowly, over about 18 months of genuine effort, was a picture he could not unsee. He had been, in every relationship, unconsciously choosing and then recreating a dynamic that mirrored the one between himself and his mother. A dynamic in which he tried continuously to earn the approval of someone who was emotionally unavailable and whose approval, therefore, could never be fully secured. He had been doing this not once but 3 times in a row with 3 different women, and he had blamed each of those women, privately, internally, for a pattern he himself was perpetuating. Seeing that clearly was not comfortable, but it was transformative. 2 years after the 3rd breakup, Thomas was in a relationship that he described with a kind of quiet satisfaction that was entirely new for him. Not the high of early infatuation, but something more durable. He used a single sentence to describe it: "I feel genuinely respected, and I feel genuinely capable of offering the same." That is not a small thing. That is, for many men, the work of a lifetime. Thomas is not perfect. He still has reactive moments and hard days. But he is someone who knows himself now, and that self-knowledge is the most important thing he ever built. The second man is Aaron. Aaron heard everything Thomas heard. He found the same books, was exposed to the same ideas, could articulate the same principles. But Aaron used them differently. He used them as a superior analytical lens through which to evaluate women, interactions and outcomes from a safe, cleverly detached distance. He became very good at explaining why his relationships had not worked. He had a framework for the failure of every one of them that placed the error elegantly outside himself. He used knowledge as armor rather than as a mirror. And Aaron is still alone. He is more articulate about his aloneness than he has ever been. He can describe with impressive precision exactly why connection has been difficult for him. But he cannot build it, because building it would require him to apply the mirror to himself, and that is the one thing the armor was constructed to prevent. The difference between Thomas and Aaron is not intelligence, it is not luck. It is courage. Specifically, the courage to let understanding change you rather than simply arm you. The principles in this video are not weapons, they are mirrors. And the man who uses a mirror honestly, who is willing to look at what it shows and then do the difficult work of changing what he sees, is the man whose life actually transforms. Baruch Spinoza lived a life that by most conventional measures was not what anyone would call successful. He was excommunicated from his community in his 20s. He lived modestly, alone, doing careful methodical work in relative obscurity. He never married. He had no children. He died young. He did not see his most important work published. And yet the more you read him, the more you sit with the depth and the honesty and the extraordinary precision of his thinking, the more you sense something extraordinary, a man who is genuinely at peace with the terms of his own existence, not resigned, not defeated, at peace in the way that is only available to someone who has understood something true about the nature of life and chosen to live according to that understanding. In the final part of the Ethics, Spinoza wrote a sentence that I want to leave you with, because I believe it is one of the most quietly radical things ever written about what it means to live well. He wrote, "The free man thinks of nothing less than of death, and his wisdom is a meditation not on death, but on life." The free man. The man who is not in bondage to his unexamined passions. The man who is not controlled by fear of loss or hunger for approval. The man who has done the work of understanding himself and his world with sufficient clarity that he can move through life in a condition that Spinoza considered the highest expression of human existence, genuine, active, earned freedom. That man does not spend his hours rehearsing what could be taken from him. He spends his hours building what is worth having. He is in meditation on life, on what is here, what is possible, what he can contribute and create and become while he is still here to do it. That man, the man who has examined his wounds and is no longer at their mercy, who has built genuine purpose and moves toward it daily, who offers himself in relationships from strength and not from fear, who holds his frame gently but persistently, who has the depth to feel everything and the groundedness to be controlled by nothing. That man does not need to chase. He does not argue for himself. He does not manage or manipulate or perform. He simply shows up, consistently and fully, as someone whose presence communicates everything that matters without requiring explanation. That is not a fantasy. It is not reserved for exceptional men or lucky circumstances. It is the result of specific, honest, difficult daily work. The work of self-knowledge. The work of building something that matters. The work of holding yourself to the standard you know you are capable of, even when doing so is uncomfortable, even when doing so means walking away from things that are familiar but diminishing. Even when doing so means looking honestly in a mirror and deciding to change what you see. This is not a destination you arrive at and then coast from. It is a direction, a consistent orientation toward becoming more fully who you are capable of being. And the choosing of that direction, the daily, imperfect, sincere, recommitting choosing, is itself the thing. It is the practice. And the practice, done with genuine commitment over genuine time, produces a man that even he did not know he was capable of becoming. You are capable of it. I would not be saying this if I believed otherwise. The fact that you are still here, that you gave your attention and your honesty to this for the last hour or so, tells me something about you, It tells me that you are not satisfied with a smaller version of yourself, that there is something in you that already knows the direction, that already understands on some level that the path forward is not through better tactics or sharper analysis or more cleverly managed emotions. The path forward is through the deeper, harder, more honest work of becoming genuinely free. Spinoza spent his life in that work. He gave everything to it. And he left behind a body of thinking that 3.5 centuries later still reads like someone who understood the human soul at the level where it actually operates. You have access to that understanding now. What you do with it is entirely yours to decide. Before you go anywhere, I want to ask one thing of you, not for this channel, for yourself. Think of one principle from everything you encountered in this video, just one that landed with genuine weight, that touched something real rather than just interesting. That made you see something about your own patterns, your own history, your own relational life, with a clarity that was not entirely comfortable. Now do not just file it away, write it down. One sentence. What did you see? And what does it mean for how you are going to move forward? Because naming what you learned is the first step toward actually living it. And living it, not just understanding it intellectually, but allowing it to change your actual behavior, is the only thing that matters. When you have done that, leave it in the comments below. Not for me. For the man sitting in his car after a hard conversation. For the man who found this video at 2 in the morning because something hurt badly enough to make him search for answers. For the man who has been carrying things silently for years and needed to know that someone was willing to say the real things plainly and without judgment, your comment might be the exact thing he needed to read. If this video gave you something genuine today, a shift in perspective, a moment of real recognition, a framework that will actually stay with you, then share it with one man you care about, not to fix him. Not because you think he needs to be told something, but because these are the conversations that men rarely have with each other. And the scarcity of those conversations is part of what keeps so many men in the patterns they are in. Subscribe if you want to keep doing this work. Because this channel exists for one purpose, to contribute to the growing number of men who are choosing to understand themselves, develop themselves, and move through their lives and relationships with the kind of genuine presence, strength, and emotional intelligence that makes real love and real respect possible. You are not here to be small. You are not here to spend your years managing your anxiety about whether you are enough. You are here to build, to grow, to become. To show up in your one life, with all its difficulty and beauty and complexity, as the fullest, most honest, most genuinely strong version of yourself that you are capable of being. Spinoza called that freedom. I call it the work. And the work, done seriously and with real commitment, is the most important thing a man can spend his time on. Go do it. I will see you in the next one.